First of all, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's panel discussion. This is the last event in the series of Fragile Strength events. And those who don't know, Fragile Strength is a year-long project started last year in August, and now it's last exhibition of the project. And in this whole project, we are talking about how hard it is for males to talk about their mental health, where throughout the journey a lot of people supported us to make sure these conversations go on and on without getting that full stop. And today's panel discussion topic is women's role in male mental health, because women act as a carer, act as a wife, act as a partner, girlfriend, supporter, a lot of different roles women play. But a lot of times these roles are being underplayed, like neglected. Underplayed is not the right word. Neglected. So this discussion is just a way to understand those areas where these perspectives, how they are helping male in supporting their mental health, will come in. I hope it makes sense. Okay. Yeah. So in panel we have. I'll start from here. Okay. And on panel we have Emma Howe. Emma Howe is director of Minories. As the director of one of the Colchester's most prominent cultural institute, Emma brings valuable insight into how galleries and art spaces can nurture inclusive programming that promotes dialogue around mental health. With a background in community-focused curation, Emma advocates for the use of creative practice as a vehicle for emotional exploration and healing. Next we have Anisha Thampy. She is a designer and artist. Anisha is a visual designer and fine artist with an interest in social psychology and cultural narratives. Her works often investigates theme of identity, vulnerability, and gender through design lens. With a master's in communication design from National Institute of Design, India, and a bachelor's in fine arts, Kerala. She brings her insight in how South Asian diaspora women thinks about mental health and support it. Next we have Dr. Veronica Lamarche. Veronica Lamarche is a senior lecturer at University of Essex Psychology Department. Veronica is also one of the lead researcher in Fragile Strength along with Dr. Nathaniel. Her research focuses on understanding how people regulate trust and dependence in their romantic relationships, and how feeling of uncertainty and vulnerability can influence relationship stability. Her work is guided by two main research questions. What are the individual differences that predict greater relationship resilience in the face of uncertainty? And second is, do self-regulatory system managing responses to uncertainty outside of the relationship influence relationship regulatory response within the relationships?
I'm happy to start. I think one of the things we have to keep in mind is that social roles are often culturally defined, and as part of a lot of our cultural definitions of gender and relationships, there tends to be an expectation of men to suppress their emotions and to keep their emotions hidden, and for women to be the one who are emotional, who carry emotional burden, and who are meant to cope with that silence as well. And so I think to an extent, the ways in which we all buy into those cultural expectations and norms, we reinforce those patterns. So I think that's one of the predominant ways that women end up falling into that trap, is actually just by reinforcing the same cultural norms and expectations. And it's easy to understand why we would do that. So for example, in the work we've done with Artlune, we know that men who feel more connected to their culture feel a higher sense of self-esteem, but they also tend to reinforce the idea that emotional expression is negative. And so these things in our lives, like gender norms or identity or cultural identity, can be really comforting and a source of well-being and self-esteem for us, but they can also come with this kind of double-edged sword of what they sometimes bring into that narrative. So we have to work on re-establishing what those norms mean in order to break them down. So that's one way I think that we contribute to that.
Yeah, I think like rather than more from a woman's perspective, like an artist or a graphic designer, we also tend to sort of play upon stereotypes, right? Like so we have to be like very careful about like how we are depicting like gender roles, and even if we are doing like an illustration for a book, like you have to really look at like, you know, how are you representing women, how are you representing men. So as a woman also, I'm a bit more conscious about like, you know, how is this depicted, or like, you know, how the things are designed around women and men is different. So yeah, I mean, I do feel like as a woman designer and artist, like I do have a lens and a bit more control on like, you know, how you are showing men's you know, problems, and how they are being represented in design and visual medium.
I mean, I agree with everything that's been said so far. I think that kind of stereotypes thing is very clear a lot of the times. I think maybe we don't step up enough and challenge where, you know, when we hear kind of people saying, oh, you know, man up, or it's, you know, I tend to see it in more like social situations, like maybe if I'm in the pub or something, you know, it will be, you know, for examples, you know, an older friend of my husband will think it's all right to comment on something that he's doing, and he wouldn't say that to a woman. And I think I am constantly surprised by things that people think it's okay to say to my husband but don't say to me when it's around emotions or around that kind of thing. And I just kind of think I guess we have to believe the men in our lives when they tell us that, you know, this man said this to me, and support them, and not kind of minimise that as it having an impact, because how are we supposed to help men to be more confident in and also I think it's showing emotion as a strength. Like I've had a lot of different experiences where being talked about as soft is seen as being a bad thing, and actually I think that being soft and vulnerable is a strength. I think we're going to have to shift the whole perspective of that. I mean, as somebody who is a director of, you know, an organisation, being vulnerable when you're in that position is very, very challenging. But I think kind of more visibility for women and more feminine attributes and shifting the perspective so that they are seen as being strengths is an important part of it, because then it wouldn't be seen as being so awful to be vulnerable, you know. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
If I can jump in as well, I think one of the things too is thinking about this doesn't just start in adulthood. We need to be modeling this much earlier on in everyone's lives. So some of the work my PhD student has done has focused on looking at how receiving emotional invalidation in childhood for both young boys and young girls has consequences in how they navigate their emotional expression in their adult relationships with their partners. For men in particular, we have a tendency for young boys to be more dismissive of certain emotional expression for them than we are necessarily for daughters. And so if you're thinking about, even at the early stage, if you're dismissing a boy's sadness, if you're dismissing a boy's fear, if you're dismissing certain types of emotions, he may actually grow up with a lack of understanding of his own emotional expression, which can contribute to that silence that you were talking about, and becomes really difficult for it to navigate in adulthood in relationships where they may nonetheless want to be. We know that men are most likely to express themselves to their romantic partners. And so it's this interesting context in which that's the greatest likelihood of expression is in that one context. But then it creates a tremendous amount of burden for both partners. It's pressure, right? Yeah. Because you become, as a partner, that only in heterosexual relationships, the only outlet for that partner who maybe doesn't know how to fully express themselves because of the context they've grown up in, and also, you know, maybe at odds with what you need from them emotionally in that moment. So you end up pushing back. You know, if they're angry or upset, you might feel angry or upset for a different reason, and it creates a conflict, and now you have a burden where you're trying to manage their emotions and manage your own emotions, and also in the only context they're expressing those emotions in. So starting earlier on, we're equipping men with the tools to feel confident in their emotional expression so that they know how to manage that in adulthood, but also relieve some of the pressure for women in adulthood to be navigating and managing that in that context as well.
I think it's so interesting that for all of this time, like, somehow it's been seen as a strength that we're raising maybe half of the population to be not emotionally literate.
Yeah.
That is it's such a weird flex, like, so half of the population doesn't know how to process their emotions properly.
Yeah.
Or more, you know, that's being very generalised, of course.
Yeah, I often find that, like, when women sort of focus on, like, pushing their boundaries and, like, ask them to, like, you know, can you see this, you know, can you see this emotion? So I also feel like if women can, like, be more forthcoming on, like, talking to your male partner and saying that, okay, this is what happening to me, so, like, expressing my emotion more, like, more clearer, so that the other person can understand. So in that way also, like, women sort of helps, I think. Like, to just talk about your what is your need and, you know, what is the issue in hand. So I mean, that's what I think.
Yeah.
I guess it's leading by example, isn't it? It's like, you know, if you want the other person to talk about their emotions, then you have to do it as well. And one thing I've found a lot is figuring out what the communication style is. Like, because you know that not everybody communicates in the same way. So some people are, like, thinking people, some people are feeling people. So you have to figure out how to communicate in a way that makes sense to that person, and then eventually they will come along with you. It just takes a lot of time. I think also there's a lot less shame with women in like going for therapy. And I think that burden that you're talking about of, you know, as a woman, as a wife or whatever, I'm not a trained therapist. So actually I'm not in, you know, this is actually a job that somebody does. Like, that's a huge thing to put upon somebody, to expect them to be able to fix your problems and tell you, you know, to support you how to, like, there are people that have jobs that do that, and going to see them is the responsible thing to do. I think the sooner we can get men in therapy, the better.
And to your point about you know, identifying communication styles, leading them in those conversations, I always make the distinction between, it's really important in our relationships that we're able to self-reflect and identify on what we need, and that we work on being able to communicate that really clearly, because there's only so far you can bring the other person outside of a context, because there are people who are professionals that can help them if they're not able to do that. So I think sometimes the discussion around you know, supporting men can be, well, you have to help them figure out what their emotional needs are to help them come to you, but actually what you need to do is be clear in what your needs are, be clear in what it is you need to see from them, so that they have a clear way of understanding how they can respond. But ultimately, it's always up to the other person, whether they're men or women, to work it through themselves to be able to show up in that way emotionally, and in any other way we need to show up in our relationships. And if you don't know how to do that, is where you need to get that professional help, so that you're not just relying on the partner to be your therapist, because actually it's not helpful, because they have their own agenda. You need someone who has, you know, your full interest and only your interest to be able to help you navigate that, and then be able to meet you back part way. So as a partner, we can be transparent, and we need to be confident in our own needs, and confident in asking that person to respond to them, but kind of stopping at the work of doing it for them, because that's really important that they know. Maybe they don't want to show up that way. Maybe they don't feel that way. And it's important for them to know that, and to know how to act on that confidence in their own feeling as well. Even if it leaves you feeling upset, right? Like, that's the trade-off of having your own emotional states that you can act on, is they don't always align, and that's ultimately an okay thing.
Yeah, I would like to add something in it.
Of course,
from yesterday's discussion, right? So one interesting thing came out, men don't realize they need help unless and until they are all the way to the last step. When it's like, when they lost all the things, all the hope, and that's when they know they need help. But by that time it's too late, no one can support them. But what I believe, throughout this process, when you're sharing your emotions to your loved ones, right, they actually guide you in a very, like, what else? They actually channelize your feelings in a way where you understand yourself more than you just sit and have some beer and think about it. Yeah, if it makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I ended up abruptly, but
No.
yeah, but yeah, it's important. Again, as you said, it's important. Like, women are not the therapists. There are professional jobs. Who people are doing. Women is just wrong word. Like, loved ones are not the therapists. Yeah, so.
And actually, it is the man's responsibility to take. You have to take responsibility for your own well-being, and that's something which women do quite well.
Yeah.
But actually, there shouldn't be any shame, and it should be a powerful thing. It's like, right, I'm going through a hard time. I'm going to take control of that. I'm going to go and I'm going to do this. It's an action, isn't it? It's like you can go here, and it might not fix the problem, but you probably won't ever fix the problem. But you'll find out how to become more resilient to other things that happen. I don't think that therapy can ever hurt. I think that even if you think you're perfectly fine, even just going along, and you're probably not underneath it all, you know. There's, you know, just having somebody to talk to that is outside of your immediate kind of situation is very valuable.
Yeah, but at the same time, I'm just taking male side, but that's so bad. But since childhood, we are taught, as you were saying, we are not taught to appreciate certain emotions, right? We are taught to like suppress certain emotions and associate certain emotions with certain genders. Like if I'm expressing my joy, I'm like, oh, come on, it's not a manly thing, come on, females does this, right? If I'm angry, yes, that's a manly thing. You can be angry, but you cannot you can get lost, but you cannot show that you are lost.
I think it's worth a point you made a moment ago is that relationships, the reason particularly men might feel safe having that conversation is because relationships offer this sense of closeness, they offer this sense of validation. And in fact, it's true, what we see in our research is that relationships are an important context in which we make meaning of the world. Not just make meaning because we're having pleasant interactions, but because we typically share them with someone who sees the world in a similar way that we do. And so that makes us feel psychologically safe, it makes us feel psychologically secure. And relationships are tremendously important for men and women because it offers that context, especially in Western contexts where our romantic partnerships tend to be prioritized often above and beyond other relationships in our lives. And we also see that people who are in established long-term relationships have the best health outcomes. They have the best mental health outcomes, they have the best physical health outcomes, and it's not by any short means because people are stepping up and providing each other with that support on a continuous basis. I think the imbalance that you're talking about really highlights this lack of emotional training early on that gives men the tools to navigate. And we also see sometimes disparities. So doctors often talk about a phenomenon with, you know, a husband is diagnosed with a chronic illness, and the female partner steps up and learns everything there is to know about that health condition, learns what can we do to manage it, what do I have to change in my life in order to help my partner navigate their illness. And what you see, what the doctors say they see on a consistent basis is the male partner saying, I don't think this is the relationship for me, when it's their wife who's diagnosed with the chronic illness. And it's because they see that they're losing the person who's going to give them care and support, the person who's going to help them navigate emotional needs. and they're not equipped to step up in the same way, so they leave that relationship. And so I think but that hurts that man at the same time. He's losing that sense of meaning, connection, validation, support, because he doesn't feel capable of stepping up and providing support to someone who may be seen as more needing in that context. And that creates a disadvantage for both people, because we see relationship breakdowns being one of the most acute instances of poor mental health and poor physical health, particularly for men, which is quite ironic because they've lost that support network. So, I think that's where it really goes back to both men and women value so much from having this interpersonal resource available to them, and what can we do beyond only the support being in that resource context for men to develop that sense of resilience and masculine expression. And how often is it, I think we often feel, I talked about, both boys and girls can have their emotions invalidated in childhood. What does it mean if I say, to Emma, oh, I don't think you should feel so happy about that. And you might be like, oh, shoot, that makes me feel unhappy. And for men, when we say, I don't think you should feel so happy about that, they have this stereotype to latch onto as the justification why. And then it reinforces that. And it becomes about the stereotype rather than the same behavior that has the same intention, but it's being now interpreted in a completely different way. And if we worked on breaking down some of those stereotypes, men wouldn't necessarily, when they experience these kinds of pushes in their emotionality, wouldn't have that to latch onto as justification, which would be helpful, I think, because it would help break some of these cycles and patterns that we see. So yeah.
That's true. I completely agree with that. Yeah, it is a thing. Yeah, because we have this tendency of neglecting things for long enough, unless and until it's super on the face. And and till the time we are getting that emotional support, it's easy for us to share it, it's fine. But the moment we lost it, our ground shakes. Then we are trying to make sure, we again get something which we need. It's a tricky life.
So I think one of the important things when we talk about codependency, because it's often a term we throw around very loosely, and what it means in a clinical context is that one person is always supporting another person at complete sacrifice of their own needs. And it's really interesting because being in relationships, one of the things that we encourage from a research standpoint is to think about your relationship in a communal way. And the communal way versus an exchange way is a communal way is, I might sacrifice for my partner today, I'm putting my own immediate needs aside because I want them to feel happy. But actually my expectation is that they will do the same for me in the future, right? They might not do it today, but they will in the future. And that's a communal orientation, a communal expectation. An exchange expectation is, well, if I sacrifice for you today, you're gonna sacrifice something for me today. I'm not walking out of this interaction without getting an equal repayment, right? And that can be really harmful in relationships. Codependency happens when actually one person is only doing that sacrifice and they're never getting that communal response. And so we can really think about how to help women, going back to what I said before, is saying, here's what I expect from a responsive partner. I'm more than happy to support you today. I might make sacrifices today. I might ignore your bad mood today because I feel like that's your way of self-expressing. But we need to have a conversation later about how it impacts me and how I need you to work on that form of self-expression so that it's less damaging to me in the future. Or instead of getting angry, can we talk about how it makes you sad instead? Or opening up this ground. And to avoid codependency is by saying, if you can't show up for me that way, you're crossing a boundary and I won't accept that. And then it sets, we know from the research, most male partners want to be responsive partners, right? They want to be a good partner. They want to be responsive. They want to make their partners happy. And by giving each other clear communication about how you achieve that, men can show up for their partners. So I think that really empowers both partners to understand that it might be uncomfortable in the moment, right? It is uncomfortable. We know from the research that people feel worse after those types of interactions. But in a year, they both feel happier in their relationship because they've set clear expectations for how to behave for each other, which means there's no guessing, there's no mind reading. There's just, this is what I need, it's working, it's not working. Do we need to recalibrate as time goes on? Yes, no. And it creates that safe space for both people, right? If I'm not trying to second guess if I'm upsetting you, I also feel safer and more confident expressing myself as a male partner. So it's really good for both partners. Both partners win in that cycle, instead of just putting up with it because you want to protect your partner and you want to protect your relationship at the same time.
I know. Anything you want to add?
I don't think so. No, I think
Yeah. Yeah, because you said it right, setting those clear boundaries or clear expectations make things super easy. How things are going in long run. Otherwise, there's always this guess game which actually ruins a lot of relationships. And but how will we know what are those like where's that line comes in?
I mean, I think this comes down to everyone's own independent assessment of their relationship, and I think for some people, a boundary for me might be too short for another person, right? Yeah, they might feel that's really unacceptable that you've only given your partner this one way to show up for themselves, and another person might say, oh, I would have stopped even further back, right? So I think it's about, it goes back to that emotional awareness that we talked about before. If you don't know what your own boundaries are, if you don't know what you need, you're gonna set one line and then backtrack or push it forward, or right, and you create an inconsistent experience as well. So I think some of the work is you have to be honest to yourself and be confident in holding that line. And I think oftentimes we don't feel that confidence in holding that line, which then creates this zone of uncertainty for both partners and frustration for both partners. And I think also gender stereotypes sometimes set women up where we feel as though if a partner was showing up for us, because we haven't given both genders the tools to navigate emotions honestly with each other, there's this expectation that, well, he would just do it if he cared. And men haven't been given the tools to communicate how they care, and that's kind of that space that you talked about before, that zone of silence where both are now stuck in that quiet zone where one person is saying, I think you should just know what I need, and the other partner is, I think you need something, but I don't know what it is, and I don't know how to ask, right? And neither person is communicating. So you have to work on it from both sides and try and just pull that zone and add noise to that silent zone and work through it together.
I think like a good example I can say about this is like when we used to often travel like far or something. I think in India is like a general thing that men carries like women's bag. So after a while I realized like maybe if I'm tired I have to give it to Dwaka for the bag to carry for him so that he can carry the bag. But then I realized that it's actually like too much of exhaustion for him also, right? So at some point I made a decision that okay, I will pack a bag which I can carry so that it is not like a burden for him, because he's also there to travel and enjoy this thing. So I mean these kind of small things can help, like you know that okay, this much is what I can carry and I travel with that, and instead of like handing it over to a man because he's man and he has to carry more things. So these kind of small observations and things can like help in long term, like it sort of helps. And in the same way we also like adjust the things that I might not like, or so that sort of is like you said, it's like a understanding between two persons, like where what are the things that you can compromise, what are the things you can talk and figure out.
I think there's a lot we can learn from queer relationships as well in terms of how to navigate emotion and gender roles. So there's a really lovely study that shows after the birth of a child, even queer couples fall into traditional gendered norms. So they go from being egalitarian partners who are sharing household chores equitably, work equitably, to actually looking more like that traditional family structure we see in heterosexual relationships, where the man is, one partner is earning an income and the other partner is staying home. The big difference is that in queer relationship, it's the person who prefers those tasks who take over those roles, where in heterosexual relationships, it's dictated implicitly by gender. So it just becomes the woman's responsibility to be the at-home caregiver, and it becomes the man's responsibility to go and provide. And what's really interesting is it's not this division of labor that is creating the sense of unhappiness. It's I didn't really have a say in which role. Like, I really don't like cooking. Why am I now cooking every night? Whereas in the queer couple, the person who's like, I don't want to go to work every day, right? They're able to have that honest conversation because the gender norms are not forcing it on them. And they're like, you know, I don't want to go to work. I want to stay at home. I like doing these tasks. They're my preference. So I'll do that, and you take care of the tasks in our relationship that you prefer, and both people are happier. And I think sometimes in heterosexual relationships, we let gender roles decide who's going to do what and how without having the discussion around it, because society has told us that's what's expected. And we lose that ability to say, it's like, actually, I would much prefer to do this other thing. I would much prefer to express in this way. I feel this completely atypical way. And oh, you do as well. And isn't that great that we can find this balance between all of these tasks and roles? But the language has been kind of erased out of those conversations because this larger social expectation fills in the goals for us, or the expectations for us. And so both men and women can work at, I think, being deliberate, like you said, and looking for those moments and looking for these ways to say, oh, wait a second, have I just been falling into a trap of what feels like the right thing versus, is this even what I like? Do I think my partner likes it? Am I bothered if they don't like it? And being able to have conversations around that.
I don't think I've got anything to add particularly. I guess I would say I think I'm quite lucky in that I've never actually been in a relationship with stereotypical gender roles. I think it's always been quite flexible and more based around what we're both good at. I think there was one time where I was with somebody for a really short amount of time where I think he wanted it to be in the traditional roles, but it's not for me, so I think I very quickly was like, this isn't for me. I guess in the relationship that I'm in at the moment, our roles are almost the opposite of the traditional gender roles. So, I'm working most of the time, and my husband cooks, cleans the house, looks after the house, and does work as well, but a very, a smaller amount of a smaller work responsibility there. But we both understand that we're giving equal amounts to our whole experience. So we've just kind of leaned into what we need at the time, I think, which is quite good.
Yeah, but I think culturally, I think I'm sure I will agree to this. In India, specifically South Asia, I'd say, culturally it's a thing. Male are the bread earners, female will stay in home and do the thing, and that actually affects a lot of life, and sometimes people appreciate, willingly or unwillingly, they accept the role, right? But the moment someone steps out and say, no, I want to do this, then society comes in and oh, why you are saying this, why you are doing this. So that changes the narrative in terms of how in India we are generally looking at it.
Yeah, do you realise that in this, I guess in the UK, things are a bit different? I think it's still, things like maternity and paternity leave and pay. I'm not sure exactly how it works, but I'm, if it was the man that wanted to take the time, I'm not sure if they could, or sure, could they? So I think there's probably still quite a long way to go, but I do think that it's more kind of accepted that you would, not fit into a kind of stereotypical mould, so to speak.
And I think, we talked about culture before, and where cultural ideals set these norms around self-expression, and acceptability and attitudes around that. And I think it's partly being aware that actually anyone who goes against the cultural norms are often received that pushback. So even in the UK, where it's maybe more accepted, you still do get a lot of pushback on different things. So, you know, women do get a lot of pushback in terms of, are you assuming the caregiver role? Are you assuming certain responsibilities? It's just to a lesser degree because there has been also this cultural discussion around pushing that. And I think to the extent that if people in India want those cultural changes, it will come from people pushing back and saying, actually, no. And, you know, the work that you're doing by saying men can and should be self-expressing is part of that push for cultural change, and it comes from people like you doing that work and actively continuing that kind of work and creating those spaces for any cultural norms to change. If we go back 20, 30, 50 years, UK is not going to look very different from what we're talking about in India now. But you know, it just comes from at different stages, different people pushing for those kinds of changes. So I think it's really recognition to people like yourself who are saying, you know, we want to have these conversations and we want to say, actually, I think it isn't right that men feel like they can't express themselves, and look at the consequences and look how it forces people to do things in relationships that they maybe wouldn't want to do, and then, you know, more voices like yours will carry that wave of change, I think. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think that's what that's what you see consistently across different societies, and I think it's also not, you know, the UK. We know people often talk about Scandinavia, but we know if you scratch under the surface, things aren't as great as they may seem. So it's just about recognizing that progress isn't. Once you make progress, it isn't a guarantee. It's that we all have to keep buying into the vision of that progress for it to manifest.
Fair enough. Yeah, agree.
I was going to add to what you say as well about this kind of project and this exhibition. I think what makes it even more powerful is that it is curated by two men.
Yeah.
Because I think if it was, do you know what I mean? It's quite brave of you to put yourself at the front of that, and I guess you're kind of making you're trying to be an example of this change that you want to see happen. But I'm not sure that it would have the same impact if it was a female curator. I think it's more likely to gain the attention of men because it's a male. It's two men that are organising it.
I don't know if you would feel similarly, but I would think people would say, oh, of course women want to express emotions in their art, and of course they would like men to express their emotions in their art because women are emotional, right? And that's leading into the artistic stereotypes that I think you were talking a little bit at the beginning. And
and also because like art is always connected as a feminine or like softer things, and that's why like a lot of time men don't venture into art, like because they think that it's like talking about your emotions and feminine side, or and it also is giving, but in fact it's actually giving like a different tools and languages for you to express your emotions, right? And because especially for men, because it's so there is no vocabulary or like very less vocabulary for them to speak out, so this could be like a very good stepping stone, like to just express your emotions and how you're feeling, and I feel like there is so much you can actually do because it's not been explored so much. So there is actually a lot can be done from a male perspective, and how they can express through art and poem and literature.
That's true. As you said, there is not much vocabulary, and I think Diwakar here can agree to this. Like there are not a lot of emotions which, like, we feel a lot of emotions, but we only have certain words to say. If a few years down the line you would have asked me, are you anxious? What does that mean? Are you nervous? Nervous I know, but I don't know I'm anxious or not. Are you sad? Yes. Are you angry? I don't know, but I'm sad all the time. I don't know the reason. So yeah, there is a lack of vocabulary in generally global south, because I was talking to this artist Sukumaila, and he was also saying this, like people, it's a very new words. It's new words in the culture because earlier those words never existed. It's just either you are angry, either you are sad, like black and white world, no in between. But with when people started moving around, right, they realized there are vocabulary for it, which can be used to express those emotions which are not just black and white.
Do you mean literally, like there's not the language words? There's not the words for it, or do you mean that it's not usual to use the words?
I would say the words are there.
Yeah.
But again, those words are not used by men.
Yeah.
Right.
A lot of
Okay.
times.
Yeah.
Or historically.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But then the words are there, the language is there, but those languages are just kind of given to certain genders and so
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
Yes, I think we talked about a little bit about on that day also.
Yeah.
I think like if you look at like popular movies and stuff, like you can see that how men is represented, and a lot of time the story centers are around a man who is going for like a quest, and you know he's being brave and like he's saving somebody, and you will see. I mean, of course there are other movies which is not like that, but if you can see most popular movies, you still have that as a like a center plot, right? So, but and I feel like there is a lot more possibilities in movies and art to explore other aspects of men, like you know what are the other feelings, not just like being the hero of the story, you know. Just like 2 days before I saw this, just a clip of movie which I saw like very when I was in college. It's called Taste of Cherry. It's a Iranian movie by Abbas Gulastani, and there is this guy who basically is like lost and he's just driving around and like talking to people. Basically, he's dug like a grave and he's trying to find somebody who can basically bury him once he like you know just suicide. But the movie, the context sounds very sad, but actually that movie is all about hope, and like this guy is like going and talking to people, and he's sort of trying to understand his own vulnerability, and like he's trying to find connections. So those are the kind of like you have these gem movies, like you know, and that part is not explored much. Like, and we would want to see more and more that kind of movies where you know men are talking about not just like saving the world sort of a narrative, but something more. So yeah, I do feel like there is so much you can explore through visual culture, and it's, I mean, there's lots being done, but there is much more that can be done through visual culture, and yeah, that's my thing.
Do you? I have something to add. Sorry. Do you think media played a crucial role in making that idealized body of male, where they cannot express, or where they are just playing the part of the hero rather than understanding or doing those things?
Yeah, I mean that's what the thing, like when you are like, if you really have to save the world, you really have to ask help, right? Like you can't, it's not like one person's job to save the world. So, and often in movies, like that's what is being shown, like you know, that one person who is trying to save relationships, save world, save this thing. So I think that comes down to the point that everybody needs to ask help when they need some, you know, like they want to escape a problem. If there is a problem, then you have to ask people around. So that is missing in the media, or like the general how the stories are built around gender. I mean that's the core problem in like most of the popular stories and things. And we have to like break those narratives and build more realistic narratives rather than like, you know, this made up hero sort of narrative.
Yeah. When you said realistic narratives, could you please elaborate a bit?
Realistic in sense like more honest, and like, you know, what is more natural, like, you know, there is and the problem with like movies is that there is always one center person, and that the story is around that. Like, but in real life, it's not like that, right? Like everybody is center of their own story, and everybody is asking help with each other. So rather than like having, you know, emotions like centering around one person, like you are dependent on a lot of people. I mean, that's, I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. Would you like to add anything?
Maybe you can articulate better.
I mean, so obviously I'm not an expert in media and visual arts, but I think one of the ironic parts of this conversation is that, to me, actually, we're very comfortable depicting men having two emotions. We're just not comfortable depicting or giving men the space to have multiple emotions. So we're very comfortable with men to be angry, and you see that a lot in visual media, right? They're allowed to be angry, they're allowed to act on that anger in a violent way, not in a healthy, you know, oh wait, I'm angry, let's have a conversation about this. They can act on that violence, and we understand that, and we give space to that. And we're also comfortable with men being lustful, right? And they're allowed to experience that and be motivated by that, but they're not allowed to have a conversation about, you know, anything else that would have meaning around that emotional state. And so I think part of the issue in about tackling realistic stories is that actually we're fine with men having emotions. We just have to open the range of emotions that we're fine with depicting them having, right? Like we should be okay with depicting a man being sad. We should be okay with depicting a man being in love and beyond just lustful feelings, and then not making fun of him for having those emotions. Because, you know, men in rom-coms, for example, would be seen as not a good example of a stereotypical man, but he has those emotions. Men can have those feelings. And, you know, I think sometimes art just reflects, going back to those cultural norms we were talking about before, and how art can reinforce stereotypes and perpetuate stereotypes that we hold latently and are just kind of amplifying those stereotypes in a certain context. So, and I think it's interesting that you see this reflected in research on intimate partner violence. One profile of man who enacts violence at home is actually someone who experiences a lot of stress outside of home. So they're experiencing stress, nervousness, anxiety, sadness from things going on in their life. They don't have the emotional toolkit to navigate those feelings, and they come home and they're violent towards their family. They're not violent towards anyone else in their life, just their family. So they're not a violent person in the way that we might characterize other people who are very happy to go and hurt people, right? It makes them feel good, they don't really care. These are people who do care, and we're letting them down in the sense that they don't know what to do with the complex experiences of emotions that they're feeling, but they know one emotion they're allowed to feel as a man, and that's anger. And what do you do if you're angry? Well, the one thing that's okay to do when you're angry is to be violent, and they take it out in that context. So I think there's this interesting duality where we know men experience emotions, but we only allow it to be represented in one way acceptably, and that hurts so many different people and hurts men's mental health, because, you know, they're so overwhelmed with those emotions that they're acting out in a really destructive way. So it would be great to see art be able to reflect that true spectrum of experience and that honest spectrum of experience, and showcase and create norms around that as well, I think.
Yeah, I think that's really important, especially with like popular media, like films and things like that, which are seen by the widest possible range of people. So I think, you know, I don't really know what to do with this information, but, you know, we know at Minories that 75% of our mailing list is women, and 75% over that of our social media following is women. We don't have the data on our visitors, but I suspect there's probably more women than men, and I don't really know, I'm not sure why that is. I think it's something to do with that engaging with the arts is seen as an emotional thing, right? Or doing or making art is seen as being something which is a way of processing your emotions, and we know that that is the case. We also know that being involved with artistic or creative pursuits is really good for your mental health. so the people that really need to be coming through the door and getting involved in it aren't the people that are doing it. And I'm not, I guess this is more of a question than a kind of statement of anything. Is kind of like, how do we attract more men into kind of, you know, interacting with the arts and creative kind of pursuits? It's quite difficult. Women are super good at you know, like meeting, like Stitch and Bitch, you know, all of these different things that women set up, and they seem to realise that coming together and doing something creative is a really good way of sharing your emotions, because it's not as direct as just having a discussion. You know, you can be doing something else and it just happens to come out.
I think one of the interesting things in some of the research that I've done is that we found when men are feeling insecure in their masculinity, they start to undermine their relationships. So they talk about them in a more flippant way. They downplay how important that relationship is to them. They downplay how committed they are to that relationship. And so I think with women, we often see the opposite, where you're feeling insecure in yourself and you draw closer to the people around you. And I think it's very telling that for men, they feel insecure specifically in their masculinity, and they withdraw from their relationships because relationships are seen as feminine. And so spaces in which you connect are inherently seen as feminine because they suggest connection and relationships, and men automatically, in response to those threats, try to withdraw themselves from situations in which they may be linked with or connected with femininity. And the other thing that we show in our study is it doesn't work, right? It doesn't make people see them as more masculine after that experience. They just say, "Ooh, I guess they seem, you know, we've given them information where we said that someone scored really poorly on a masculine test, but don't worry, they don't love their partner very much. How masculine do you think they are?" And they're like, "Well, they're not very good at that masculine test, and I think they're not very good at relationships, but I don't think they're more masculine because of what they've done." So it doesn't even help the root cause of what people are trying to achieve through those behaviors unknowingly. It's not a conscious act. But I think even you see it in these spaces where the minute they're coded as relational, communal, collective, these are all words that are coded or labeled as feminine. And men struggle then to connect with those resources that are gender equal spaces, but just have that label that now makes them feel like, oh, but if I'm seen connecting with this, someone's going to think I'm less masculine, and so I have no interest in it, which I think is,
I think we have to kind of get them involved in an undercover sort of way. Do you know what I mean? And I think there's also a massive problem with kind of young men and boys at the moment. Like, I mean, the whole Andrew Tate thing and that kind of traditional gender roles. I again, I've absolutely no idea what to do about it, apart from, you know, we run a project with young people called Art of the Roads, and it's predominantly young men. And I kind of think that even by getting them involved and getting them through the door of the gallery, that's probably a benefit, because we're doing something together, right? So they're coming into contact with women, and also like older, you know, adult men who don't talk that way about women. So hopefully they are, you know, one of the young people is, you know, it's a rap music event type project, and one of them recently put on his Instagram, "I've decided that I'm not going to make lyrics that are degrading to women anymore, and I'm still going to perform my old songs, but I'm just not going to make any more lyrics that are about that, because actually I really like the women in my life." And I messaged him and said, "I think that's so important what you've said, and you being a role model for that is really, really important." And I just thought, you know, that's really amazing. And I don't know what the response he got to that was, but you know, that's very powerful in, you know, an 18-year-old to say that.
That's phenomenal. I think the point you made about the covertness and Andrew Tate, and we know there's a rise in misogyny, particularly among young boys at the moment. And I think what's really interesting, so in some of the work that I've done, we found that a source of a masculinity threat, something that makes men feel less secure in their identity, is feeling disconnected and lonely. And so here are a group of young men for various reasons in their life are feeling disconnected and lonely. And here's someone who's not just coming in with traditional gender ideals, but creating a community space that gives them the sense of validation and approval and acceptance you were talking about early on. You know, that relational space that is often filled, but is filling it with violence and misogyny and justification for how they may be feeling lonely, and creating community and creating connection over that, and using that for his own agendas and you know, propagating this misogynistic idea. So I think like really what you're talking about, creating those spaces that provide alternative forms of connection and then alternative role models that they can talk to and have real conversations with, but that can also
but
spot.
It's not packaged in that way.
It's not
like
packaged in that way.
Accidentally, you've joined something that is that thing, but it's not packaged like that.
And also creating a space in which people can chat, like, you know, with this rapper being able to challenge and just saying like, actually, why would I do this? I like people and how silly I've been engaging in this. But he's not like targeting them for their behavior.
No, he's just saying, I'm not going to do it.
I'm just not going to do it. And of course you like, what, do you hate the women in your life? Right. And it creates this dialogue for people to have those conversations in a kind of covert way. But, you know, I think it's this, for me, it's been really interesting to see that it's not this rise in these online communities. It's not just about the messaging, actually. The messaging is how they get hooked in the end. But the way they get pulled into these communities is because of a lack of feelings of connection, this sense of loneliness, isolation, and the feeling that there isn't this sense of people understand me. And here's a group saying, I know exactly, you know, why you feel this.
That women are this.
Yes, exactly.
Well, it's just that age-old thing of like, blame your problems on somebody else.
Exactly.
Is it immigrants? Is it, you know, all the different people that people have blamed their problems on in the past? And I think it's so much easier to blame it on somebody else than it is to actually look at the root of the problem. Because that's not as simple as it's just that person or that person. It's like, it's lots of different things.
And especially for, again, this is where you're allowed to have two emotions. It's anger. Oh, I'm angry at the women in my life, and it's lust. And I'm allowed to want the women in my life to do something specific to fill these voids. But they still haven't been given the tools. Even the young boys now still haven't been given the tools to have rich emotional conversations about what they're feeling and why they might be feeling this way. So it leaves them vulnerable to these types of communities to kind of come in with like, I have a quick fix solution to this. And isn't it great that actually it requires you to do nothing? And all of your problems will be solved if you just say that we're right in our messaging, and all the problems will solve themselves. So we're leaving boys vulnerable by not training them how to self-express and share and feel comfortable in these types of spaces that allow them to have that full spectrum of emotions and full spectrum of needs. So we're kind of letting them down still, even with all the progress that we feel we've made over the years.
I think it's really interesting as well that for some reason, like you said about anger and about lust, we don't see those as being emotions in the same way. Like I remember recently, so you know, the whole thing between Trump and Musk, and it's like when there was a female prime minister in New Zealand, everyone was like, you know, women being in positions of power, are they not too emotional to make those important decisions? Are Trump and Musk not too emotional to be making these decisions? Like, you know, you don't see people going, men are, you know, this specific situation shows that men are too emotional to be in positions of power. Like, those are emotions too, and it's just, I try really hard to say things like that, so it's like it kind of balances the playing field a bit to draw attention to these things.
But again, it's like a stereotype for the leadership, right? Like when you are in a leadership position, people want like, oh, you know all the answers, like, you know, you have to be sure of what you're doing. A leader which has like a bit of doubt is not considered like a very good leader. Like, so, and to compensate that idea of leadership, they just have to pretend that, oh, I know everything, you know, and that becomes like, oh, maybe that person is so sure about everything, maybe he's right, you know. Maybe, and that's not the case. Like maybe a leader who basically like doubts and questions things is a better leader than a leader who knows everything.
And also isn't afraid to say, oh, actually, I said the wrong thing, or I've changed my mind because I've got new information now. Like, people tend to double down on it, no matter if it's proven, you know. And we've got to a point now where it doesn't seem to matter what you say or whether it's untrue or not. Like, you just carry on, and everybody votes for you anyway. And I don't understand why that has happened. And I'm not sure if we strayed from the question. Like, that just really, like, I think it's more and more it's happening where, you know, you just say whatever you want, and what place does the truth or, you know, that have in it anymore?
This reminds me of an incident when Obama cried in front of television. He was so much backlash because he showed an emotion which is not related to men, that is crying, and that too in front of the national television, right?
Yeah.
And so that this leadership thing comes in, all like strikes me, that incident like as vivid image where everywhere in the world in news it was coming, Obama cried. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, big deal.
Yeah.
I mean, he's under a lot of pressure. I mean, I don't know exactly what he cried about, but you know, I'd be like, oh yes, he's a real human being, great. You know, maybe I can relate to him on some level. He's not a robot man.
Yeah, because he accepted what he felt like, but and continue like jumping few minutes back when you were saying need a space or a tool to understand those emotions. And a lot of times, do you think substance abuse comes in a like fill that void which created this lack of emotional intelligence created, like where, oh, let me have a drink and everything will be all right. I had 1 drink, 2 drink, 3 drink, then I'll come home and like, oh, let's start beating people up.
I mean, you see extensively, so men are more likely to have substance use issues than women. Part of this is because it becomes one of the few ways in which men do connect with each other. So men are more likely to connect, not in a deep emotional way, but have friendships where you go down to the pub and you have drinks together and you're drinking, but you're maybe not having emotional conversations with each other. You're talking about superficial things, and the drink is the activity that allows you to have a reason to connect. It's that covert opportunity we were talking about before, but in an unhealthy space. It's the same thing you see for young people who get involved in drug use. It's often in a way to form connection and with a group of people, but they also kind of sublimate your ability to express emotions in that context. And then alcohol is particularly damaging, not only because actually suppresses emotions, it's a depressant, so you're going to feel worse as you drink emotionally, but then for some people it becomes a way in which, if they're having those stressors we talked about and this lack of being able to navigate how they're feeling, they lash out, and it can be in violence, it can be just anger, explosive anger, but you do see that as a potential problem, and it's often linked with men who are depressed are far less likely to show symptoms in the classical sense of depression. They're more likely to have a drinking problem, and that's one of the ways you can actually identify it, is not because you would necessarily see the stereotypical types of symptoms that are listed in the diagnostic manuals, but actually because they're drinking excessively to cope with that emotional state that they're experiencing and don't know how else to navigate it, because they don't have that sense of safety in telling people how they feel, or even acknowledging it to themselves, like you said, right? If I'm feeling something and I know I can have a drink to turn that off, I don't ever have to acknowledge it to myself, let alone have a conversation with someone else around it, which is why it's so dangerous, a coping mechanism for people.
So I made a couple of notes about this, so I'm just having a look. I think increasingly, I mean, there's always been a crossover, and I mentioned earlier, a crossover between kind of art and health and well-being and that kind of thing. I think that's in the past sort of 10 years, that's been kind of pushed even further, and actually the arts is coming into a position where we're now delivering quite a lot of things that the NHS used to deliver, or we're collaborating with, and we're also competing for funding with health and wellbeing quite a lot of the time as well now. I think through austerity we've got to a point where the net is a bit wider of where things are being delivered from. I've forgotten what I was going to say next. Obviously there are, there's the proven benefits, of engaging with the arts, and from what I mentioned earlier, men aren't, and we had that discussion. I think we need to, I think obviously we can program things like this. I think that's really important. I think we can, when we're looking at what we're prioritising in our kind of strategic planning, for me this is a really big issue, because I'm seeing it around me, especially with young men, and for that reason, when something like this, when I see something like this, I'm like, yes, I want to program that. But maybe it's with being more transparent around what our strategic priorities are. Another big challenge we have is that our strategic priorities are very, very often driven by what funding we can get, and the funders have specific strategic priorities. So we're in a constant circle of, are we doing this project because it fits the funding, or because we actually want to do it and we find funding that fits it. And unfortunately, I've got people on the board here who argue for both ways round of doing things. My feeling is that you have to be authentic to your strategic vision and know why you're doing the thing, and then figure out from there how you're going to support it. I think that's probably...
Yeah, I can add something.
Yeah, jump in, sorry.
Yeah, because I work here as well. So a lot of times, so as you said, funding majorly rules what we are trying to do. But at the same time, we are also trying to support community in so many different ways, where the community can create a safe space where they can start sharing those things. Like we support boys and men.
Yeah, I should have mentioned that. So we offer a group called Boys and Men who work with refugees and asylum seekers, boys and men. They use our front room twice a week, and we've sort of supported them and applied for funding together. And that's because that's so important. So I think it's really, trying to act on and you can't be everything to everybody either. So I think it's trying to act on the things that that are really important to you.
True. And we had events with Health Watch Essex as well, where they did this whole exhibition on trauma, and it was so successful because people who never get opportunity to express themselves came into this exhibition with the artworks which they created. Right? So those, I think, as part of a cultural institution, those are some good ways where, without having those abundance of funds, we still try to put a step forward and making sure that whatever we are trying to do, support community in a way where they feel more safe and more expressive.
I guess we're trying to use the space and the facilities and the assets that we do have to make the greatest possible impact. And we can't do everything for everybody, but we can try and focus the things that we do have into those particular areas.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, any questions from the audience?
Writing it down.
Okay.
I mean, just to add to what you were saying, because I'm very mindful, a lot of my research is funded, and I need to also get funders on board with and they have their own priorities.
Yeah.
But I think, I think at the current climate, as someone who used to be educated in the US and do research in the US, I'm very mindful that I actually wouldn't be able to do my research at the moment in that context, because they're pulling funding for work on gender, work on relationships, work on that whole host of topics. And so I think when it comes to funding priorities and activities, funders listen to what people want, right? Like it's a reflection of what they think the populace wants as well. And so I think if people in our communities voice that these things are important to them and voice that they want to see money put in certain directions, funders are more likely to actually act on that and prioritize it. And so I think that's where community comes into play and can help shape opportunities for organizations and artists and creatives and research that support these things. Because I think we're existing in a time that if funders think that there's no interest in those things, they will confidently pull them, because that's kind of the way the winds are blowing. So I think we have to be especially, people in this room are probably patrons of the arts and culture, and so we have to really be vocal about what it is we want to see preserved, because we're in a time where people are trying to take those things away and make it impossible to do that work because they have a different agenda. So we all kind of have a community role to play in ensuring these types of spaces and work can be done. So
True. I agree with it. I think everyone agrees.
Yeah, it's just listening to what it is listening, isn't it? I think when we were going to reopen after the gallery being closed for so long, I did try quite hard to just listen to because I didn't know much about the gallery. I'd been in Colchester for maybe 7 or 8 years at that point, and I had been here a few times, but I didn't know about the long sort of history and people's stories around it. So I just spent a long time listening to, looking at all the different things that it had been used for, and like listening to people's memories of it and getting a feel of it, really. And I think it's clearly, the Minories is a very important place for Colchester. And I think as soon as I realised that, I think we're never going to know exactly what's going to work with everyone, or we're just, and it's that thing about saying as a leader, like not pretending you've got all the answers. Like I don't think we always get it right. We do things that nobody is interested in, and it happens, but we just move on, and then we try and act on the feedback that we do get, and not pretend that it's finished at any time. Like, it's not finished and polished, it's always a work in progress, and I think it always will be.
I think like emotional honesty of what you're feeling, and it's not, and making look like the emotional honesty is also a strength. It's not like just about being very strong and you are responsible for everything, but being able to talk about your emotions very more freely and having that space is something that you want to see, right? Like where men have more access to these spaces where they can be vulnerable and be honest about their emotions. So that would be one change I would like to see.
You probably saw by my blank stare that I'm still thinking. I think I'd just like to see more people talking about it, and definitely to see some kind of concerted effort from maybe the government or something to do something about what's happening with young men. Like, I really don't think it's being looked at as the priority that it should be, and I think we're going to see, if it's not, dealt with, I think we're going to see a lot more problems as we go forward with how I think another thing that I saw is that young men are increasingly going rightwards on the political spectrum, and young women are increasingly going left. And I can't imagine how, I think we're becoming it feels like we're becoming quite polarized, but that's split along gender lines somehow, and I'd like to see more kind of research into that and some kind of actions of what we can do to stop that from happening.
I agree with both of you, and to add another priority for government and society would be one of the things that I advocate for as a relationship researcher is that we need to be having more of a focus on building tools early on that help us have positive relationships with each other, regardless of your gender, so that you have the toolkit you need when you experience stress, when you experience vulnerability, when things don't go well in our lives, which is inevitable for all of us. Because if you have those skill sets, we're dealing with not trying to take if you use like disease models, we're not just trying to kind of like cure the thing once it's happened, we're taking a preventative approach in the first place. And I think men would certainly benefit from this, because I think some of the issues we've talked about are coming from that lack of having the tools they need to, not that they don't have these emotions, but we don't have the tools or the language or the skill set to navigate them. And so I would love to see more focus on kind of preventative types of approaches by focusing on what does a healthy relationship look like, what does healthy emotional expression look like, and how are we building this in each other early on, so that we can really flourish as adults or young adults and through the lifespan, really, because we've talked about how there's that feedback loop as well. So that's kind of a priority I would love to see from kind of my research and focus in different ways, would be supporting positive relationships early on.
I'm not sure it's been a long time since I was at school, right? But I know when I was at school, they didn't really teach you anything about relationships. They literally taught you how not to get pregnant. So I think that's the stage where it needs to happen. Like, it needs to be and it's given to everybody. Like, it's just a much wider view of all of that, but also how to have healthy relationships, actual practical techniques and tools that you can use and take away with you that help you to navigate everyday life.
It's interesting, so this is kind of a question I ask my students in one of the modules I teach at the university every year, and this year, I think a student had a really insightful comment where they said, like, we need to be training people, young people, how to cope with feeling rejected or let down by other people.
Resilience, isn't it?
To have that kind of resilience, and to know that, if I am feeling rejected, if I'm feeling whatever number of different ways, that there are certain agentic and healthy ways to act on that without negating those emotions, right? It's not that you don't have to feel upset that that person hurt your feelings. It's that you can feel agency in how you respond to that upset in constructive ways. And I think, whether that's reaching out for help and reaching out so you don't have to be your own hero, and or if it's just being able to express that you feel upset, that's the toolkit that I think we're sort of missing at that younger stage. And I think, at least from my students, it still feels like that hasn't been fully brought into the curriculum yet, if they're saying this not too many years after being in that educational context. So lots of work to be done.
Yeah, I really love the curated walk that they did, but what it gives also is that you're not like directly talking about your emotions, but you're talking about emotions through other artists and how they have explored their emotions. And I feel like, I think we were like from 5 or 6 people at that point, but that itself has made like such a beautiful space for people to just open up through other people's art and work. And I think that would be one of the things that we should do more often, like, creating spaces for people to just open up and talk about it.
I would like to add something. We talked about tools, we talked about all the things, but we didn't talk about how will we know we are depressed. We need to first identify the problem to reach to the tool. What I believe, more training needs to be given in terms of understanding that you are in a state, you are moving towards a place where you need these tools to understand your mental health.
Like when to actually start.
Yeah.
What, when to actually start.
Yeah, because as in the beginning I said, male realizes way more towards the end when there's no turning back. But if there's a whole training we got where not just training, like understanding that how we are feeling, and we understand now, now I need support, now I need help, now I need these tools to navigate it. So that thing will actually change how as male we see. It's just my point of view in that. Yeah. Any questions?
Almost finishing. So many.
I just wanted to add, like the side, this thing where women seem to sort of are able to express more, whereas men don't. It kind of also seems like because women have for so long been sort of controlled, that they've developed their own ways to deal with it, and it seems like that's why they have these sisterhoods and like these different ways to express themselves, because they don't have they can't express it outside in any way, whereas men have kind of felt like, because everything is kind of designed around them, and they don't kind of in a way sort of seem like there's any need to express. I mean, so everything is kind of made for you, so you never kind of really develop those tools. Right? So I think there's those kind of stuff, and it's also how, I don't know, like the whole idea of how capitalism is affecting.
True.
In a sense, like that, who earns, who doesn't, and everything is around making money. So yeah, I mean,
That's why because media is capitalized, right? And that's why media, if media is earning money by men showing tears, they'll start promoting that. But right now media is getting money where males are going to gym, having those muscular bodies, fighting. So they are just promoting those things. And that's where I think the whole idea of capitalist society in shaping our mindset comes in. They are only telling us what they want to tell. They are not telling the whole story.
Yeah.
That's a very good insight. Yes.
Alright, finally already. I want to start with a thank you to our hosts and guest speakers. Vikas, thank you very much for organizing this exhibition and the events around Fragile Strength. Thank you, Emma and Minories, for being accessible and supporting local artists and charities and groups such as Boys and Men and Women Assemble. Also coming from a region where cultural and traditional conservatism has an effect on having open conversations around male mental health and emotional expressions, I want to specifically ask to Vikas, but also to the rest of our guests, what can be done to involve and incorporate more men from regions where men can be subjected to more culturally conservative norms, such as Southeast Asia and Middle East, and what do you think can be the antidote to toxic masculinity and male fragility? I believe feminism and trainings on emotional intelligence these are important aspects to have, but how can we incorporate it more through artistry and art? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. That's a long question. I remember some part. So I'll answer in bits. If I'll miss anything, let me know. And please feel free to add. So one thing, how we can talk about communities who doesn't talk about mental health is first, there are few barriers. Like I think Veronica is in more better position than me to talk about it, but I'll try. Let me know if I'm wrong. Right? There are few barriers in it. First, that there's a lack of acceptance, as we were discussing. People don't really accept that their mental health is an issue. If you are going to a therapist, there's one label. You are mad, or you are having some very serious issues in your mind. It's not just you are going there to have those conversations which you can't have with anyone else. So that is one of the biggest barrier for me, like having those open conversations where, as I said, going to therapy won't hurt, right? But that first step of approaching a therapist, that's where the courage comes in. And a lot of times, because there's a fear of being a laughing stock among other males, right? Males tend not to take that step. Like, oh, where are you going? I'm going to therapist. Are you mad or what? What's happening? Why are you going to therapist? Come on, let's have a beer. I'll be your therapist. So those conversations stop the proper procedure which needs to be followed, or proper path which they could have taken it to make sure they are reaching to the point where they are understanding their mental health. Okay. You would like to add?
I think that's great. I think you give a perfect answer. But I think also, I think community and connection is part of the antidote. And I think that creating alternative spaces where you can have those safe conversations and reset the norms. And I think also a lot of the time people, it's not that you have a really strong belief necessarily that a man can't ever express their emotions. It's just that that's kind of the norm in the environment that you're existing in. So if you create community spaces where people can say, I don't believe that, I don't accept that, and I also think you should be talking to a therapist, or it should feel okay feeling upset or feeling okay expressing. It kind of resets the norm, because it's not a belief that we're all necessarily as entrenched as the cultural kind of zeitgeist would make you think. Like, people would make you think that 100% of everyone agrees that only women are emotional and only men can't express their emotions. But then you have conversation with people and you realize, no, we're really, I don't think that's 100% true. And so by having those spaces where people can have those alternative conversations, and resets a bit of the social narrative as well, and gives people, like these online communities are doing in a very harmful way, it gives people alternative communities to connect with that are healthier and achieve the goals that we're hoping for. And I think they are the antidote. It's just other groups are doing it more efficiently and faster than we are, in those of us who want to see these types of things broken down. So
yeah, and this also adds when Emma said that student or that kid put story on Instagram, I think, like now I won't be writing lyrics which are against women, right? So those kind of conversations again set raise the bar, where you don't need to go too steep just to say, if I'm doing this, only that's the right thing. Like, as you said, having those alternate conversations make a big difference. Thank you.
I think also supporting, I think one of you mentioned it before as well, if you see someone say something like that, not being silent, that you support them, right? Showing, showing that there's that support out there that dispels this belief that we all secretly think negatively about this person. But when the rapper comes out and says, I'm not going to have these lyrics anymore, being like, oh, I think that's really great, because the more people who are endorsing and supporting, the more it sets the tone that I guess this is actually how people are silently thinking and believing anyways. And so if someone does say, I feel really upset, I was thinking of speaking to a therapist, someone just speaking up and saying, that's really good, I'm really proud of you. That can be enough for everyone in that space to suddenly feel they don't have to pretend that they're upset by it, because that one person has broken the norm by saying, I need this, and the next person has further reinforced that broken mold by saying, isn't that great? And everyone else who's sitting there secretly thinking, oh, I actually think it's really great too, no longer feels the pressure to conform to other types of ideas of behavior. So it can be really, really powerful to just give those little boosts of acknowledgement and encouragement when you see them, because it's dispelling this what people think is living in the silence. So
lead by example. Is there any other part we are missing? Okay. Any other questions?
No, just that I would completely agree. As a parent of a teenage boy, who his character is to be perhaps much more sensitive than his peers, and the amount of times that I will hear somebody in his environment saying, "Suck it up, take it on the chin," or "You behave like a big girl's blouse." There's so much harmful language that is in the common vernacular that is used that is just sort of eroding people's confidence to be openly vulnerable.
Yeah, I think that's where we've got a responsibility, that if we have the confidence to say something, you know, I will say, oh, actually, no, I don't think that's, you know, you're saying, you know, suck it up. I'm saying, actually, no, you know, that's not okay to say that, you know, and that not everybody has that, you know, and that's fine, but when you do, I think you probably should.
Yeah. Having that courage is very important, otherwise people step over. People love pushing back. Okay, thank you everyone, thank you for joining us. And those who don't know, as I think I told earlier, Veronica along with Nathaniel are leading the research for the project. We are looking for volunteers who can support us, who can give us interviews online. It's a totally anonymous interview, so if you know anyone who would like to share his opinion on the project or the questions which Veronica and Nathaniel have prepared, please email Veronica or Nathaniel, and we'll be putting, we have I think QR codes here.
Yeah.
So please scan those QR codes and give your feedback, honest feedbacks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.